Good evening, and welcome to part 2 of Say Her Name, a discussion on women, race, and police violence. My name is Karen Thompson, and I am a senior staff attorney at the ACLU of New Jersey, and I'll be serving as your moderator tonight. Tonight's discussion is hosted and organized by Newark Communities for Accountable Policing, otherwise known as NCAP. NCAP is an umbrella organization based in Newark that is aimed in building a respectful, accountable, and transparent Newark Police Department. NCAP works for reforms that promote community safety and lead to community policing practices that uphold and respect the human and constitutional rights of Newarkers. NCAP's steering committee members are People's Organization for Progress, Ironbound Community Corporation, and the Newark chapter of the NAACP. And the ACLU of New Jersey are also enthusiastic and excited community members. Before we start today with tonight's amazing panelists, I just want to speak a little bit about the current context for police brutality and just give a few numbers to tell you about the landscape of the issues that we're going to be discussing tonight. Since we last met on July 20th, 16 people have been killed by police across this country. Since 2015, 250 women have been shot by police departments. 20% of those women were Black. And like Breonna Taylor, a third of them were shot in their homes or the places where they spent the most time. Of those 250 women, 12 of them were shot when police officers showed up at their homes to conduct a search or to make an arrest. But since 2015, even though Black women have accounted for less than 1% of the overall fatal shootings in cases where the race of the victim was known, within that subset, Black women, who are only 13% of the population, made up 20% of those who were killed and 28% of unarmed deaths. This is a tragic number, and this is the number that we're going to be unpacking tonight. It should also be noted that in all of those cases, and in every shooting in the United States, only 1% of police have ever been charged with any crimes. To add to some of these issues, in New Jersey, what we're starting to see is the reaction to the need to push for change. And on August 20th of this year, the New Jersey Supreme Court dramatically decided in a decision to limit the powers of Newark's Civilian Complaint Review Board, which was created in 2016 to investigate police misconduct. In a 6-1 decision, the court struck down key parts of Newark's 2016 ordinance, which would have been, if it was left unchanged, the strongest CCRB of its kind. But what the court did was hold that the CCRB does not have the power to issue subpoenas, to actually require police to respond to accusations of misconduct. And they also held that the board cannot conduct investigations if the Newark Police Department is already carrying out their own internal affairs probe. And those are probes that are very much cloaked by privacy or the assertion of privacy, and cloaked by a veil that is very, very hard to penetrate. So within this context, how do we make change? How do we create a space where activism translates into change in people's lives? We will get to that with this really phenomenal array. But before we go there, I would like to show you a clip from a movie called The Killing of Breonna Taylor, a documentary film made by one of our panelists, Eure, Richen, so that we can look at the human cost of what seems like just a policy question to some.
The last thing she said was, "Turn off the TV." Next thing I remember is a loud bang at the door.
911, where's their emergency?
Somebody kicked in the door inside my girlfriend. Breathe, God. Help!
No one ever told me really what happened. I didn't find out that she was shot by a police officer till I saw it on the news.
She had a very inviting personality. She always had like a problem solver attitude.
The media tried to assassinate Breonna's character. We can't keep quiet.
Immediately, there were red flags. There were bullet holes everywhere. It was a war zone in there.
Once the shooting occurred, they never searched the apartment any further.
Justice needs to be rendered. The question is, will that happen?
It has to stop.
Our panelists tonight are Monifa Bandele, a Senior Vice President for Moms Rising, Keesha Eure, a licensed clinical social worker, Tiana Kimborough, a native of Morristown, New Jersey, and also a founder of the Black Lives Matter movement there, Yoruba Richen, a award-winning documentary filmmaker, and Charlene Walker, the Executive Director of Faith in New Jersey. So the first question is actually to everybody. My question for you and for the audience to know is how has your work involved questions of police violence, and how has police violence affected you personally? And I guess let's start with Monifa, and then we can just go around.
Yeah, sure. I don't seem to be able to unmute my video, but I will go ahead and start answering the question. So police violence really impacts all of us, whether we are directly impacted or how it really impacts the quality of our life in our communities. I've been stopped by the police. One of the scariest moments in my life was being stopped by the police and having him ask me for my phone number. And when I refused, I was given a ticket for failing to stop at a non-existing stop sign. So that's one of many personal stories. But violent policing impacts us all around. In my community in Bed-Stuy, there is a wonderful woman who lives across the street who has a severe mental health diagnosis, and probably at least once or twice a month, she has an episode where, you know, she's in the street and she can be in danger, and people want to help her. People want to figure out how to get her help, but no one on the block dare dial 911 for fear that instead of her getting help, she would be harmed. And so this is the way that police violence impacts all of us as Black women. We are directly impacted when we're stopped, when we are policed in our schools and our workplaces, especially our girls, but also the way that police respond to Black women in general in our communities makes us unsafe, because even when we may need an ambulance, we are fearful to dial those 3 numbers to get the help that we need, because we know that we may possibly be met with violence.
Thank you. Keesha? Keesha, I think you're muted.
Okay, here I am. Can you hear me? Okay. So police violence has impacted me, I would say, personally and professionally. Personally, I had a brother who was shot by the police, and you know, luckily he didn't die, but as a result of that, he had sustained, you know, some trauma and brain damage as a result, and was afraid to pursue anything because he just felt like nothing would happen or it wouldn't go anywhere. And so as a result, it was not challenged. And so many of us face that, where police are not challenged when there's police brutality, police violence, police misconduct in our communities, because many people are afraid to challenge that. And so I can, you know, attest to having that happen in my family. I can attest to seeing it in Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, which I chair, where members have been arrested and unnecessarily. We had a permit to protest, and so we were still arrested and treated harshly, knowing that we were trying to help stop the violence and fight against violence in the community. And there was no need to arrest us. There was no need to treat us harshly. There was no need to behave in a way that wasn't, I would say, in agreement with us trying to work together around community policing. And so that's how police violence, police brutality has affected some of the work. But I would say on a bigger level, now that I'm working side by side and starting to affect some of the policy with law enforcement, I would say being able to see what's happening nationally, and how in the city of Newark, we don't have a lot of issues, but we do have a consent decree in place. We do have federal oversight and federal monitors here, which means something happened. And so we are in the process of trying to correct those wrongs, but we can't gloss over and act like things have not happened here where there's been negligence, or there's been violence or brutality or misconduct or things that's gone unaddressed. And so I'm, very intricate in trying to make some of those policy changes happen, being on the grounds, but also being at the table.
Thank you. Tiana, what's your experience been with police violence?
Okay, hi. I would say that, growing up, born and raised in Morristown, it's the suburbs. And I think that people forget that, when, I've experienced at a young age 2 rapes in a family home while growing up. And I think a lot of people forget that it is very traumatizing. I don't think that it's considered at all who else a rape affects in the home. When you're going in and you're searching for drugs or you're searching for a person of interest, you are forgetting that at times there are their family members who are also being affected by this. And many raids take place in the middle of the night. So, I can remember that I had at the time my maybe 7-year-old sister waking up to loud noises and a bunch of men and women entering the home, and she having a gun pointed right directly in her face. It's very traumatizing, and I don't even know if she realizes that this took place. But I was just old enough to be able to remember this. Fortunately, no one was harmed, so I'm thankful for that. I just think that there has to be more conversations about these knock warrants, these raids, and how it affects the family entirety. And I will continue to work towards some of that and start that conversation, especially here in Morristown. Here, growing up in the suburbs, I feel like Black women are often dismissed. We aren't giving as much chances when pulled over by the police. I can remember coming off of maternity leave and not being able to register my vehicle because I forgot I was raising a newborn baby, and police pulled me over. And I said, look, I explained the situation, didn't care. And I know for peers, it's a different outcome because their skin is different than mine. So those are just some of my experiences with the police here in the suburbs.
Charlene Walker, thank you. What about you, Charlene?
Hi, I actually grew up in a small town, Hillside, which is right next to Newark. And what many people don't realize is though Hillside is about 2.4, 2.8 square miles, it's a town that when I was growing up, and still today, very racially segregated due to redlining. My house, actually, we were one of the first Black families to move into Hillside, and someone tried to burn our house down when my family moved in before I was born. The experience with police in Hillside is kind of notorious, to the point where Lauryn Hill even put in one of her lyrics that Hillside brings beef with the cops. And that was because we knew that if there were more than 2 Black children walking down the street, you were going to get stopped by the police. I remember in my young adult years or late teenage years, sitting outside my significant other's house who lived on, the rich side of Hillside, and the police pulling up behind us, and the lights just spilling onto the dashboard, and both of us are programmed and instantaneously threw our hands up on the steering wheel and the dashboard and didn't move. And we were just so conditioned. And I remember the officer coming over and asking, "Boy, what are you doing here?" Boy, this was the 80s. Talking about, "Boy, what are you doing here?" and taking his license and him having to prove, "Yes, I'm in front of my house." And then fast forward to, I have a nephew who is 17 years old. And one day I went to his Instagram story and I see that he's skateboarding down the street, and he's just saying over and over again, "I cannot believe the police stopped me. They stopped me and they searched me." So I had this real fear for his life, for all of those that I've had contact with. And I have a background working in mental health and working with people with different abilities. And there's been more than one time where I've had to put my body between the police and a person with a developmental disability, because what they saw was a Black person acting erratic, not a Black person who had a disability that was in need of care. And having to put myself there and jeopardize my well-being just because they're pulling guns and they're trying to throw them on the ground. So my experience is pretty varied, not to mention the fact that at my very core, I'm an organizer. And one thing that people don't really talk about much is that organizers hear stories over and over again, and we have this secondary trauma, right? Because we bring it in all of the stories of police brutality that we've heard across the state. With Faith in New Jersey, we are constantly advocating for those that have been lost due to gun violence and police brutality, from passing the independent prosecutor bill to really trying to end qualified immunity right now. So I'm very much connected to this issue as a Black woman, as working in this field.
And last but not least, the Yoruba, Richen.
Hi there. Wow, it's really hard to hear all these personal encounters that our community has had with the police, and those numbers that you listed in the beginning of the show are quite startling and scary. I think of one terrible incident that I had personally when I was in college, where I was, the police came to break up a party of a bunch of college students, and ended up putting handcuffs on me and calling me Aunt Jemima, and having, never did, needless to say, I hadn't done a thing, and pulling me, and I freaked out. I'm one of the few Black people at this party. And that's something that, that I'll never forget. Fortunately, I haven't had anything, that was violent happen to me. But I think that we know the history of police violence in our community. My mom, who was a playwright in the 1980s, about a killing here in New York of a young boy. So this was effect of police violence in our community is something that I grew up with. And of course, with this film, The Killing of Breonna Taylor, I'm, continuing to explore, because unfortunately it continues to happen.
Okay, and to that point, let's stay with you. And first of all, let me just give a quick introduction. Yoruba Richen is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work has been featured on numerous platforms, including PBS, the New York Times, Frontline Digital, The Atlantic, and Field of Vision. Her latest film, The Killing of Breonna Taylor, premiered on FX and Hulu last week. And she is the director of the documentary program at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY. So Yoruba, in making the film, or actually what actually motivated you to make this a project? Why did you want to make this film? And in making it, you're covering kind of the two parallel investigations that are occurring around Ms. Taylor's murder. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to us a little bit about how those investigations are different and what you think the potential outcomes might be.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? My internet is being a little weird.
We can't hear you. You're breaking up a little bit, so
okay.
Just to be mindful of that.
Okay, I'm sorry. You can tell me to start again if you can't hear me. So this project actually was a film that came to me from the New York Times. The New York Times has a weekly television program, and they were interested in, as this Breonna Taylor more, and we started seeing they want to look at, did I break up? Is that okay? They wanted to look at, what was going on here, why this case had not been getting the attention of these other killings, and what happened, to try to figure out in the killing of this young woman. So they contacted me because of my previous work. And of course, when I heard what this film was, the film they wanted to do, I immediately said yes. This was, one of the ways that I felt I could, in some way, contribute to this conversation, this uprising that we were having around police killings, not for the first time, but again having, and so make the film. So that's how it came to me, and we were able to do it quite quickly because the resources were there because of, this was the New York Times, this was a television show, it was on FX and Hulu. And that's how we were able to make the film and get it out there. I started in June, and it aired last week. So it was a very quick turnaround. And really, I think the first comprehensive story about Breonna and who she was, and also trying to piece as we can. And in terms of your second question, the investigations. So we made this film as things were still as things still are unfolding, in that there still is a lot that we don't know. For example, we don't know which officers hit her, which bullets hit her. And that's because the ballistics, now we understand the ballistics have been received by the investigators, but they haven't been released. And the LMPD, all throughout this process, has been very non-transparent about everything, basically, to the frustration of the family, the city, and the community. But just to clarify about the investigations, there are two investigations that are happening. One is the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron. He's the state Attorney General, the first African-American Attorney General of Kentucky. He's a Republican protege of Mitch McConnell. He spoke at the RNC, the recent RNC. That is the criminal investigation that is happening. And there's been no word, well, up until very recently, no word about when the results of though it's looking like now, from the information that we have, that it could be imminent in the next week or so, next couple of days, next week. That investigation at night, and if any officers should be charged in her killing. Then the FBI investigation is a separate independent investigation, and that investigation is looking at if there were any civil rights violations, in terms of everything that led up to Breonna's killing. what were the reasons that brought her officers to her house that night legitimate. I'm going to turn off my video and hopefully you'll be able to hear me better, okay? So those are the two investigations that are happening. Now, and that we don't know when that investigation, FBI investigation, will be released. The last thing I just want to point out is that the criminal investigation, the AG's office, if you can watch the film, or if you know this, what happened that night is the police obtained a no-knock warrant to go into her apartment, and Kenny, her boyfriend, and her were asleep in the bed. They said they never heard the police IDing themselves and thought someone was breaking into their apartment. And Kenny fired after they got up and rushed, put on clothes. Kenny fired a shot because he thought somebody was breaking into the police office. Breaking into their homes. Now, Kentucky is a stand your ground state. They have the right. He's a legal gun owner. He said, as he says, he's never fired his gun outside of a range. But because he fired that shot, and then all those shots, that's what prompted, all those shots from the cops. It makes it very complicated for it may make it, but our understanding is it may make it very complicated for the police to be arrested and charged with attempted murder because Kenny fired that shot in self-defense. But there is one officer who shot outside of the apartment blindly. He's the only officer that has been fired. And he, because he shot blindly from outside, there's more of a chance that he may be indicted for reckless endangerment. But it's very unclear whether any of the officers will be charged with murder. And then I'll just say about the FBI investigation. The FBI investigation has wider latitude to look at if the reasons that the police stated that they got the no-knock warrant are legitimate. If they find that they're not legitimate, that Breonna's civil rights were violated in them getting that no-knock warrant, then there is a chance of criminal charges. But remember, this is the local FBI that is doing this investigation, and then they have to bring it to the national FBI, which is run at this point by William Barr. So that's, in a nutshell, where things are. And I think justice for Breonna is going to be challenging, the justice that the community and that the country, so many in this country, are calling for.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, I want to encourage everybody to put questions that you might have in the Q&A, in the comments. We are tracking them and we will answer them as we move on. I do want to move to Monifa Bandele, who is the Senior Vice President for MomsRising.org, an on-the-ground and economic security organization, grassroots organization of more than 1 million people who are seeking to achieve economic security for all moms, women, and families in the United States. She leads work on maternal and children's health, and she successfully has made winning policies at the federal and state levels that reduce maternal and infant mortality. Monifa is on the leadership team for the policy table for the Movement for Black Lives. And she's also on the steering committee of the New York-based Communities United for Police Reform, representing the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, which is a member coalition of the Movement for Black Lives. And just in the last decade, she has led the launch of 2 historic and successful legal cases against police misconduct and worked to pass landmark police reform legislation in New York City. And so, Monifa, having heard that, what Yoruba just discussed about Breonna Taylor's case, can you speak to us about how this outrage and the many outrages that are happening by the day, how can we change those instances of misconduct? How can we affect all of these lives being lost? And what policies do we need to see in real terms, in real change, to to end this?
Thank you so much for that question. And thank you so much, Yoruba, for that powerful film. Even the clip, it brought chills all over my body, because this is not an anomaly. This is actually the lived experience of Black women and men all over the country every day, as your statistics in the beginning outlined. Um, the Movement for Black Lives is a national ecosystem of over 150 Black-led organizations from around the country, and we emerged out of the Ferguson uprisings 6 years ago. And 5 years ago, we put together a document called the Vision for Black Lives, which outlined the things that we knew would help to keep our communities safe. Those things that had to do with economic justice, healthcare, and of course, ending brutal policing. And one of the concepts that emerged from that Vision for Black Lives document is a piece that we called Invest, Divest. We basically said that for many of us who've been working on these issues actually long before Ferguson, one of the first cases that I fought for justice was around Amadou Diallo through a People's Justice 2000 campaign. So we're talking 20 years ago, that we must really divest from our systems of policing and incarceration and invest into the systems that we know keep us safe. Investing in safe housing, investing in safe and high quality schools, investing in a mental health care structure. Many of our states and cities don't even have the infrastructure to care for folks who are having mental health challenges and a whole host of other things. And so when we came to this moment in May, where the entire nation was in an uprising around the brutal murder of George Floyd, and getting word from what had happened a few months earlier around Breonna Taylor, the Invest, Divest framework took off and turned into the national call that people saw all over the country on Juneteenth, which was defund the police. And defund the police essentially means we're not just saying shift dollars around. We're not just saying maybe make police pay for their own lawsuits. In my city, in New York, $750 million was paid out in 1 year to pay off civil suits alone, separate from the larger $6 billion budget, but to actually reduce the number of policing, reduce police officers, reduce the amount of policing that takes place in our communities, because it is that police interaction that is dangerous and is harmful. And we need to bring care, like Tiana was talking about, and not harm, as Charlene also named. So invest, divest, defund the police is our demand in this moment, that we stop tinkering around the edges. Many of the reforms that we call for are just. There should not be no-knock warrants. That is, we saw that back in the day. I don't know if people remember Eleanor bumpers in New York City. You know, how many elders have died either from being hurt or, you know, they had flash grenades as part of the no-knock warrants here. Banning chokeholds, that's a great thing. We actually have banned chokeholds in many states where people are still choked to death by the police. You know, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And so the conclusion for activists that have been working on these issues for decades is that the police departments and the police unions, with their outsized political power, and the departments with their oversized budgets, cannot be held accountable to our communities unless there's a complete structural change. And for a lot of people, that's scary. You know, what do you mean defund the police? Where will we find safety? Who will we call? And I believe in the genius of our communities that we can create something. You know, what exists now was created. Some people sat down and they said, we should have this department, and we should have a Department of Health, and we should have school. And we are just as brilliant. You know, our genius is great, and we bring to that discussion what's not working. And we need to completely redesign what safety and care looks like. Who do you call? We also have to reject, as we push for like more holistic responses, especially to people in need of care, that those responses be embedded in the police department. You know, we see now cities are popping up saying, oh yeah, we'll have social workers and mental health professionals respond, but it'll be embedded in the police department, again, growing the size of the police. And we say, no, these are independent entities. And so we call on justice for Breonna. We support and flank every piece of reform that her family is calling for, everything that her family is calling for justice, because we know there's not another system in place for any kind of restorative process. But at the same time, on a parallel track, we're pushing forward legislation like the National Breathe Act. And the Breathe Act is a bill designed by the Movement for Black Lives that would cut off the spigot of funds to states and cities from the federal government for policing and incarceration, and incentivize states to redirect those funds to things like education, housing, healthcare, mental health infrastructure, all the things that were already named by the panelists. So we ask that we dream big in this moment, that yes, we need to make sure there are that no knock warrants are banned, that chokeholds are banned, and that the full list of reforms that we've been calling for the past 20 years are passed. But we have to restructure the whole thing, because we know even with those things in place, our police departments are too powerful, they have too much money, and the police unions are blocking these reforms. And so we know that they will block accountability to those reforms once they become law.
Indeed, and to that point, to the question of care, that leads beautifully to Keesha Eure, who is a licensed clinical social worker who is practicing trauma-focused cognitive behavioral, who is a practicing trauma-focused cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. She is a community-based trauma specialist who works with victims of violence and crime and has over 15 years of social work experience, including working with at-risk populations, including youth and adults who are in the criminal justice system and social welfare system. She also works with various populations of individuals who are homeless, incarcerated, unemployed, those who have mental health disorders and substance abuse issues. She's also the chairman of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, which was founded in 2009 to protest against the senseless violence plaguing the city of Newark. And under her leadership, the organization has thrived as a cornerstone of the community. And so, to the point of care that Monifa just brought up, Keesha, and also that Tiana mentioned in her kind of original statement, how do we care for a community that has been almost unrelentingly faced with these issues? And what everyone said at the beginning, I think, frames this. No matter where you are, if you are in a city adjacent to Newark, if you are in Newark, if you are like Yoruba at college at Brown University, this is a constant and pervasive threat. It is a constant and pervasive fear. So what does that mean for the mental health of very specific communities, mental health of the larger Black community, and the mental health of Black women in those communities?
What that means is that the trauma is just exacerbated, right? It's just so major, it's complex, because you go from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, and it's compacted, and it becomes complex to where no healing is happening. And so to the bigger and larger part is we're talking about, police reform, police accountability. We're talking about all these things with policing, in which case the community is impacted on a long-term basis. So we're looking to try to help solve some of these things community-based and community-wide. So we ask for community policing, in which case many things have been tried in terms of community policing. We have community service officers. We have so many other entities where we're trying to work. Sorry, we got some technical difficulties. I'm sorry. Okay. But we're trying to work to, reform and all of the words, right? Disband and stop and do all of these things. In which case, our communities have been traumatized for years, right? We talk about generational trauma. We're talking about years and years and years of trauma that's wreak havoc on the community, where the community, you see substance abuse issues, you see stress, depression, you see schizophrenia, you see addiction, you see mental health at its all-time high, in which cases now it's manifested because now we have words to put to it. In which case mental health was a stigma. The word, mental health before was stigmatized. And we're trying to destigmatize it because we understand that it's really a reaction to what's happening to you. And having a reaction to what's happening to you is normal. But we've been suppressing it for so long, and Black people in America have had to suppress their trauma and anything that's their abuse and victimization, right? They've been victims and survivors in this country for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so this is just manifesting. We know that law enforcement, all entities, not just police, you want to talk about correctional officers, sheriff officers, state troopers, all entities and all levels of law enforcement that's victimized people of color and their communities continue to be traumatized. And so some of it, I know we want to talk about resources and what, some people can do and what we can do around that. And, Monifa stated it, where she talked about the defunding piece. I know that's the hot topic. And defunding most of the community-based things that are happening. The police has the largest budget everywhere in every city. But the city of New York, the budget, I believe, is about $233 million. The largest budget. So they get to have overtime, they get to have vehicles, they get all of these different resources to be able to do their job, which includes fire and other entities. But what about the people who are first responders as well? What about the people who look like me, who look like Monifa, who look like Charlene, the people who are right alongside with law enforcement doing this work? When the shooting happens, we're right there. When a stabbing, a carjacking, any of the crime and violence happens, then we are first responders as well. And so we have to level the playing field in terms of what first responders look like, in terms of how we treat first responders, and that law enforcement don't get all of the credit for all of the things that's taking place. In the city of New York, we have a decrease in crime and violence. And perception may be different. People in the community may say that's not true, that the crime and violence is still on an all-time high. But if that's the case, law enforcement always gets the credit, and which means they always get more and more funding. But what happens to Keesha Eure, who responded with her outreach team? What happened to Newark Community Street Team, the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, the Hub, the Westport Victims Outreach? We have about My Brother's Keeper. We have about 16 other organizations that come under the Brick City Peace Collective who are helping alongside law enforcement who don't get any additional credit or funding for helping to reduce some of this crime and violence. So we have to shift and start to and shift how we look at this work. And we have to reclaim it. I would say people like me, social workers, case managers, helpers, people who are in the health field, we have to reclaim this work, and we have to know that there are resources that are out there. We just have to ask for them. We have not because we ask not. And so we have to start to ask. If the public safety director makes $260,000, then guess who else is going to make that kind of money too, right? If the police officer is making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, then my first responder is going to make that kind of money too. So we have to start to look at the playing field and start to level that out a little bit more, and start to put resources out. 911 is not the only resource. 911 is not the only place to help. There's different forms of help, and we have to just shift the narrative around what help looks like, and who are the helpers in the community. And don't call us when no one else knows what to do. Don't call us when you've exhausted every resource possible. We want to be the first call too. We want to be a first responder too. We know that there's some things we can't do that law enforcement does. We're clear about that. But we are valuable to the community, and we add value. We are the resources, right? We are a resource. We're our own greatest resource and help because violence and crime starts in the community, right? It's a community thing. And so we are the responders to it, and we can stop it, we can intervene, we can mediate it, and all of those things, which helps us to be able to fight against police violence and police brutality, and over-policing in our communities, because we get to police our own communities on a different level as well. So we want to take some of that responsibility. So there should be the police violence and accountability that should happen, has to happen on both sides, but there's community accountability as well. We know who the shooters are. We know who people are that's committing the crime. They're our neighbors. They're our family members. So we know many of them. But we also need to band together and come together for when it's time to hold the community violence responsible, but also police violence and police brutality and the over-policing of our community. It has to be equal in terms of how we show up and show out. When we come out and 12,000 of us came out. 12,000 of us came out to protest against the police. But do we come out the same way when our people do the same? And we do. Newark Anti-Violence Coalition has been in the streets for 155 weeks in a row when we were fighting police violence and community violence. Just going into the neighborhoods, protesting against the violence. But we also have created and had demands attached to that. We had demands, and we weren't just out there just protesting, but we have to do that on every level, even with the police. So what are our demands around police brutality? What are our demands when it comes to women being brutalized by the police? And I know that's what we're talking about at this moment around the women and how women are being brutalized, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor. And so we have Kimberly Crenshaw, who did a wonderful TED Talk on intersectionality about all the women who were killed by the police. And we didn't know those names, but we always know the other big names with the women and Black women especially, their names are never known. And so we have to continue to keep those names in the headlines and continue to fight when women are brutalized by the police.
Great, and I think we're gonna have to work on your audio, Keesha, because you've got such great things to say and people are having a hard time understanding. So next time we get to you, we're gonna make sure it's clear. But one of the things I heard you talking about was addressing the violence in a community and the reality of that, and making sure that we have the resources to support folks in the community who are dealing with the violence within, as well as the violence from without, from these police departments. And so to that, I want to turn to Tiana Kimborough, who is a native of Morristown, New Jersey, and who is also a devoted mother to her 5-year-old. She is a social worker and domestic violence advocate who supports, uplifts, and empowers children and families. She advocates for BIPOC folks while fighting for social and economic justice. And she also became a new small business owner of Real Talk Matters, LLC. But before that, she had a successful 9-year career in the social services field. And so Tiana, we've heard about what this looks like in Newark. We've heard about what those specific problems are, but you're in Morris County. So that's kind of believed, thought of and seen as a more suburban area. What is this struggle in Morris? What is it? How is it different? What are the challenges that are faced by the specifics of that location?
What I believe some of the challenges here is that we have a Black presence. It's not always known. I believe that because our Black presence isn't out there, per se, that whenever we do bring up any type of problems, whether it's with the Board of Education or with policing, we're often dismissed. I think that being in Morris County and the towns that I've had the pleasure of working with over this past summer, Black Lives Matter Morristown held a summer series in partnership with Wind of the Spirit, and I was able to meet so many powerful young people and people who are still in school in their towns. And myself, I guess I was also shocked of the presence that's here because it's often gone unnoticed. And I think something that I'm very proud to be able to be a part of is amplifying these voices that are in Morristown, that's in towns of Boonton, Rockaway, Chatham, where it is predominantly white. But there are so many people, there's so many young people that have come forward and I've met over the summer that has shared with me some really unfortunate experiences with police in their town. They have shared with me some experiences in school, and also, looking at the curriculum in multiple towns across Morris County. It's sad of what I'm seeing, and it's, what I'm having trouble with is how to continue these dialogues, right? How to continue to make Morris County, to put Morris County on the map. We aren't Newark, we're not Patterson, so we often get left behind in a lot of these conversations. And there are people that, there's a lot of young people that have so much to say. And I'm so happy that I was able to create a safe space. That's what I believe that Black Lives Matter Morristown is doing, right? We're creating a safe space for people of color to come forth and be a part of something. They feel like they're a part of something now because we are applying pressure to the police. We are applying pressure to the Board of Education all over Morris County, and the Board of Education in the town, in our neighboring towns, they see it coming now. We are mobilizing. So, I think it's very important for those who are listening tonight to understand that you don't have to be in in Newark or a well-known city or urban community to have power. You don't have to be directly impacted by police violence or police brutality to speak on it. So I hope by those who are joining us tonight and hearing us and these powerful women, I hope that more people come forward and say, look, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do, but I want to do something. And that's what I hope to continue seeing. And I hope that I can be a part of multiple dialogues with multiple people all over Morris County and New Jersey to help people find that voice and also, provide that safe space and a seat at the table. So. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm now going to bring it to Charlene Walker because she is the queen of bringing all of the disparate questions together for a powerful punch. And so Ms. Walker is the executive director of Faith in New Jersey, the largest interfaith multi-ethnic grassroots organizing entity in the state. She believes that people of faith must unapologetically embrace radical love in action. Radical love in action extends beyond the walls of houses of worship and into the world to break the shackles of systemic injustice that oppress our families. Charlene is a New Jersey native, a powerful woman of faith, and has a consistent record of fiercely advocating for racial, immigrant, and economic justice. She challenges leaders and institutions to better unite our social movements, and she reminds us of the need for Black, Brown, and poor communities to work closely together to build more power to win on the pressing issues that support the people of New Jersey. And so, Charlene, with that, how do we move from protest to policy? And then the second question I have for you, and I think that they inform each other, is that what I kind of hear a lot is that the question of the church, the question of spirituality as a force of protest is something that's been relegated to the civil rights movement in the 60s and is not necessarily relevant to the acts and the protests that are happening now. So my question is for you on that is that true? And if not, why not?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Everyone that's gone before has done such a great job. And I would echo a lot of what the other panelists have said. I'll start out with the faith community, right? So Faith in New Jersey has this belief that clergy or faith communities have a responsibility to be prophets to the resistance, not chaplains to the empire. And what that means is that we stand in rebellion. We stand with those in the street. And we won't be opioids to the masses. All too often you see legislators turn up and say, hey, can we have this clergy come speak here? Because they think that their responsibility is to come out and tell people to calm down. But after over 400 years of repression, why are we telling people to calm down? That is not our job. Our job is to give a clear analysis from our values as to why this is wrong and how we need to live into our values, where everyone is seen as human. Because at the very core of everything that we are fighting, we're fighting the dehumanization that occurs in our heart, our minds, and in this country as a whole. So clergy are showing up. They're providing safe spaces, places to train, places to keep people safe, and they're willing to be on the front lines and use their bodies to protect protesters, to say, you know what, we need to go so much further. And how are we moving? We've been making a really concentrated effort to try and help move people from the protesting into the policy, right? So one of the protests, what we've been doing at protests, honestly, is telling people, you know, let's not just protest, let's organize, right? That's where we need to move to. And this movement has been largely youth-led. And I have got to say, the youth have got it down. Before, ages ago, you would kind of, you know, worry when, as an organizer, when somebody would maybe get approached to the media, because we all know the media tries to find the one person that's not necessarily has the political analysis, right? That goes with the movement to try and deter what they can put out in the press. Our youth are on message. They understand exactly what is going on. They understand exactly what's required and what we're trying to achieve. So what we've been doing is connecting you. Like I said, it's mainly Black-led youth, led by Black women, led by the LGBTQ Black community and those with different abilities, and just funneling and talking to organizing, especially our type of organizing is relationship-based, right? So it's all about building those relationships and the level of trust that we need in order to bring people in to develop that analysis, and then to strategize together. And what I love about Faith in New Jersey, because I was involved in Faith in New Jersey before I was the executive director of Faith in New Jersey, is the fact that you might have a doctorate, you might be street certified. Like, your voice, everyone's voice is equal and matters. And those that are closest to the hurt have the understanding as to what's actually at play and what system needs to be changed. And also understand that this conversation, like all of the panelists have said, it's not just about policing. And once we start talking about nothing but policing, we've lost a fight. The conversation is about poverty. The conversation is about mental health and all the things that have been stripped from our communities, and saying that you need to invest in us. So I think once we have those conversations and we pull people together, like right now, Faith in New Jersey is doing a 6-week training series of people of faith, youth, those that have been directly impacted or hurt by the systems that are at play, in order to understand power, in order to understand how to strategize, to move whatever policy or changes that we want on the ground. And that's where we're going, and that's how we're moving people forward. And what happens is, to move people forward, right, it's all in those relationships, bringing in more people that they're in relationship with. Because what we also know is it only takes 2.5% of the population to impact change. So that's how we're trying to move people.
Fabulous. So I'm going to take a question from our Q&A, and I think we're going to show everybody's faces, and just because it's 7:06, so I'm going to ask everyone to keep their answers slightly more concise, but don't feel too much pressure on that. So the question is, I am a white passing Latina, a feminist, and activist for Black Lives Matter. I do realize that Black women are not getting their voices and stories heard as much, and feminism itself tends to focus on white, BIPOC folks. How, as a woman, do you suggest we get those voices heard? How can we remain allies with Black men and BIPOC leaders without shadowing the women? So to kick it off, maybe Charlene, let's go back to back, and then anyone else who wants to speak can come in.
Hi,
Right. Oftentimes we say step in, step out, right? Like if the mic is being passed to you, pass the mic. It's easy. Allow people to speak. You have that power. I think that also there's this, I don't want to say underestimating, but I believe that Black women have the power of taking and really sitting in a space and really owning it. And I think it's just to all of us to recognize that. And as somebody that considers themselves an ally, honestly, I don't really want allies. I want co-conspirators. I want somebody that's going to conspire with me, that's going to sit down and really have that deep conversation and say, what about this? What's next? That's what I want. And I think that that's your step. Conspire with us. Don't just ally, because ally, I feel like, is more passive, right? Like, I really want you to conspire.
Keesha, what do you think?
Okay. Charlene took it right out of my mouth. I definitely believe the same thing, but I know that the word of the day has been, be an ally. But I know that, sometimes that can be hard because then it becomes, well, what about me, right? And some people start to feel like that, well, what about us? And that's where we start to get that all lives matter, kind of thing happening. And people mean well, but I certainly think that we have to keep the focus on the table of the people that we're talking about, right? Charlene said we're not going to talk about police, as much as we're going to talk about poverty, as much as we talk about resources, as much as we're going to talk about the core, right? And the core reason that these things happen and we don't talk about, which hasn't even been mentioned here tonight, is white supremacy, right? At its finest core, right? Racism and white supremacy and the culture of, domination and superiority. And as we find that, these instances of brutality happens is because the person didn't follow orders or they didn't listen to what was said to them or what was demanded of them, and that their humanity wasn't seen. So, at the root cause of all of it, we have to go to the root cause and address the root cause. And many of us have not been able to find, the answer in that. But it's not for us to answer the question. It's for those who are, the perpetrators of it to find the answers.
Fantastic. And I'm gonna actually just ask a different question because I think it's important to follow up with that. And this is to Monifa, because I mentioned at the top about the slight undermining of the CCRB that just happened with the New Jersey Supreme Court. And so my question for you, who lives in New York City and has a similar CCRB in place, what happens now? Like, how do you think when something that can be diminished so easily either by the courts or not supported by the legislature, how can we make sure that CCRBs remain a powerful force in seeking justice against police misconduct?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I feel like the thing that is happening with the CCRBs actually puts a fine point on our invest, divest, defund the police call, right? Because what the CCRB is, or what if you fought to have an inspector general in your city, or if you fought to have a special prosecutor in your state, it's all about creating these mechanisms to make policing do something that it wasn't designed to do, right? It's like trying to force accountability and to prop up a system that needs to be completely reimagined, right? It will, because of that outsized political power that I talked about, will like form itself like Voltron to get around all of these things that we put in place so that, police don't hurt communities, like CCRBs and inspector generals and special prosecutors. It's so much money. It's throwing money and energy, right? We call it throwing good money behind bad. Now, I'm not saying to stop these campaigns. We are in this moment. We have built these things, but now's an excellent time to reimagine and say, what does a system of safety and care look like that doesn't require us to spend billions of dollars to make sure there's another system that will hold it accountable that's not totally connected to our communities in some cities, like what was set up in Newark. So I really think this like shines a light on defund, you know, what's happening with the CCRBs, because when we look at every place where very, very brilliant reforms are happening, we repealed a law here in New York State called 50A, which was a police secrecy law, which hid the disciplinary records of police officers all over the state. Like the person who strangled to death Eric Garner, you know, he has this long disciplinary record, but it's a secret, right? Pantaleo. And once we won the repeal, the police unions have sued to block the data from being released, right? So it's like you're fighting something on the merits that you can make it do something that it is not designed to do, right? And we know now from all of our scholars that policing is designed to uphold mass incarceration and to really continue the slavery that was instituted when Africans first got here. So this is a time where we've got to dream big. Like we have to like think outside of the box. I think whatever fight, however we can help from nationally or from New York in this fight to protect the power of the CCRB, we will. But everyone on this panel is talking about how we're having conversations to build something that don't require a CCRB, right? Because it's going to be rooted in our communities anyway.
And so with that, let me turn to Yoruba to talk a little bit about the community impact on folks in Breonna's family and in her town. What did you see? And my other question is, as a filmmaker, and as someone who's an artist, but who's also a documentary filmmaker and dealing with stories, people's stories and people's histories, and how they're located in the bigger cultural history, we're in this moment right now where people seem very eager to believe untruths, who seem very eager to believe lies, but less eager to believe facts that don't kind of fit their worldview. So how do you see the role of your movie and movies like it in getting out facts that are actually, you know, centuries old, but so often disbelieved?
Hi. So I'm going to take your second question first, because it's really hard question.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
That's a little bit better, yes.
Okay. How can we counter these, you know, this barrage of untruths, of lies, of misinformation factors from, you know.
Oh, you're breaking up again. I'm
still
sorry.
Breaking up?
Yeah, I don't know if there's.
Okay, hold on a second. Sorry, I'm gonna try moving. My internet has just been.
Okay.
Okay,
So
is this any better?
Let me move to Tia. That's a little bit better. Do you want to try again?
Okay.
And then if it doesn't work, I'm going to move to Tiana. We can come back.
Okay, sounds good. So I was just saying that the lies and misinformation that we get are from, you know, the president on down to all kinds of social media, et cetera, et cetera. And we see, you know, this misinformation about violence, who's committing the violence, who really are the victims of violence. And I see my role as a documentarian to really, you know, try to change the narrative. And, you know, and sometimes you feel like you're screaming in the wind, but that is why I got into this field, and that's why I do the work that I do. And I think I'll see some glimmers where the narrative has been shifted. There's a lot of pushback. But look at something like the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones project in the New York Times. To be able to, you know, with her project, reframe our, you know, our history
as Americans and as Black Americans, and to really make an impact. I think that's a really good example, and that's kind of what, you know, I strive to do in terms of reframing these stories and the misinformation that's out there. And I wanted to talk about trauma for a minute, because one of the things that was most apparent to me as I when I went to Louisville and made this film, I was there for about 3 weeks. You know, I got there and the city I had no idea, you know, what it would feel like. Like, we got there and the city was boarded up, and the businesses were, you know, the downtown was boarded up, and the people, the community had taken over Jefferson Square and renamed it Breonna in memory of Breonna Circle. And seeing how and granted, this was during sort of the height of, well, we're still in the height of COVID, but during, you know, COVID, the double impact of this community that had been, you know, was dealing with COVID and had been protesting and taking over the square, Jefferson Square, which is in the downtown Louisville, which is where all the Metro Police is, the Metro Police station, the courts, all the sort of hub of, you know, of the city, of the legislative part of the city, and demanding that, you know, that something be done, and that, you know, that the police be fired, that something be done to address this tragedy in the community. And it was a feeling you got in the city of the uprising that was happening and the trauma that they were facing as a community. There were also, during the height of the protest, there were at least 7 more people who were shot by the police. And seeing how the police force reacted to the protest, I mean, you see a couple shots in the film, the militarization, they look like an ongoing coming army from these protesters who were, you know, basically peaceful. These folks were protesting every night to know, you know, and the police would come on like a occupying force. But then also the trauma that I saw in the community of Breonna Circle, of her family, of her friends. You know, Breonna, it's not just the loss of this young woman, it's the loss of a sister. It's the loss of a godmother who she you know, her goddaughter stayed with her a couple times a week. Mentor, she was a mentor to so many people in her community, and inspiration. It's the loss of the dreams that Kenny had with her. So it's not just one person dying. It's the loss to the entire community, and to the way her friends said it. A couple of her friends said, we have it in the film. She said, I thought this was going to get better as the days go by, but it's gotten worse. And I need help. I need psychological help. So seeing that and experiencing that trauma really brought it, brought it home that what these are not just names or memes. These are not only people in their own right, but people that mean things to other people. And when you kill that person, you kill all that. You kill all of that meaning to those other people.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that just a little bit, because what it reminded me of, the trigger that it brought, was the case around Eric Garner and how his daughter, Erica Garner, who fought day in and day out, then died herself, of the sickness and the trauma of how the state treated her for fighting for justice for her dad. I mean, Yoruba hit the nail on the head. It doesn't just kill the person. It's the loved ones are dragged and dismembered in a way that you can't visually see. We see them strong. We see them on TV. We see them at the, with the bullhorn, like we saw Erica Garner. But they too are being shot at. They too are being strangled. And that's really the holistic way we have to think about, as organizers too, how we approach building these campaigns for justice and supporting these campaigns for justice.
And we're getting close. It's like 7:22. So I want to ask one more question of everybody. And I want to start with Tiana. We as Black women, we hold a lot of trauma. We hold it for our parents as caretakers. We hold it for our children. We hold it for our partners and spouses. We hold it for the community. And this has always been true. There's a way in which our shoulders seem to have to be broader. And part of it is our own commitment to our people and to struggle. But we hold it in a way that I think is different. And so I just want to acknowledge and ask you to speak to the pain of that and this and what it takes to be an activist, what it takes to be a fighter, what it takes to be a truth teller, a witness, and what that removes from us. But I also hope that you'll tell us what you do to keep yourself whole and to keep yourself functional without having to give up all of your soul. So why don't we start with Tiana, and then Tiana, why don't you pick the person to speak after you?
Just hearing you bring that question to light, it's powerful, because I think in this work, you forget the amount of baggage that you are holding, because you're dealing with your own family, but you're also taking on the live streams of our Black women and men and children being murdered by the police. You're taking on the community and their pain and their struggles. I think the most important thing to do that I myself have struggled with is tapping out, saying, look, I have to take this weekend to get off of social media, to not answer emails, because with a person who has struggled with depression and anxiety, I think we forget that mental health is very real in our Black community, and we don't talk about it as much as we should be talking about it. And it's hard, for people, Black women right here that's a part of this. It's hard to tap out, because you feel like you're missing something if you're not constantly checking your emails. I feel that if I'm not looking at my emails, there's somebody that's reaching out for a teach-in because their daughter or their son is being harassed in their neighborhood. So, there might be somebody reaching out about, the HOA and their complex bothering them about Black Lives Matter propaganda. Like, there's little things, these are little things to some, but people who are doing this work, this is a full-time job outside of our full-time jobs, right? So it's like, I don't know if I have a clear answer, because I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with this, but I think one of the things that I can say is that check in with yourself. If you have to check in with your feelings and how you're feeling and where you're at, to then make a decision if you need to pull out a little bit, if you need to delegate tasks, if you're working within an organization or you're working with other organizers, or you need to say, hey, I'm gonna, take a step back, but here are some things that can be looked at while I'm gone. If that makes you feel better, then go that route. But I do think that you have to check in with yourself, and your mental health should be definitely priority, because if we are not checking with ourselves, then we're not able to do this work. We're not able, if we're not good, then we can't be good for the community that needs us. And Charlene, what do you think?
Hello. So I am not a model person for self-care. So I'm going to start with that. So I literally just got over COVID. I had it for 2 months and some change, and I was definitely doing some work during that time. And it's that sense of carrying, and you're carrying this weight, and it's your community. And you know what the thing is? We fight not because it's a job. We fight because we're fighting for every person we love. How it is so hard to turn that off, right? One thing that I learned is I was down in Louisville after Breonna Taylor was murdered in June. And one of the things that I learned, thank God, from Black Lives Matter Louisville, shout out to Chanel Hims and the crew there, was self-care. And they were intentionally building spaces for their community to care for one another. From meditation to yoga to Tai Chi, really trying to intentionally care for one another. And what sustains me, and when I do get to care for myself, is my community. It's those that are in this struggle. Nobody understands this struggle but us that are in this struggle really fighting. Like, I need to have a conversation with a Tiana and check on you. Like, I need to have a conversation with somebody else that's out there in the streets or that's eating and breathing this all the time. And then I need to also unplug and spend time with my great niece who's 15 that called me today to tell me she got her second ear pierced, like her second earring, right? Like, she's so proud. Like, that's what I have to do. But we definitely hold and carry so much. And sometimes we want to sit it down, but I haven't quite figured out how do I go like this and just sit it down and go, I'm gonna come back to you in a minute. I've gotten where I've paused a little, but I pick it right back up. So whoever has any more coaching would be great for me. I'm gonna pass on to Keesha because I think that you're gonna have some solutions, right?
Yes, I certainly have none for you. Because again, like you said, we're in this work frontline. We at the shootings, we at the courthouse, we at the school, we at our jobs, we at people's houses, we on the phone all times of the night, we're at the emergency rooms, we're at the funeral parlors, we're at the Zoom call at the police department. So we have to be everything for everybody. On top of that, trying to be wives, right? And trying to be mothers, and nurture everything. And so one of the things that I've been striving to do, and I'm be concise, is trying to have some balance. So what I've done the last maybe 4 or 5 weeks is got together with other people who are doing this work, and we do healing work. We smudge, we lay down, we sage, we listen to some healing music. We do bonfires, we write affirmations, we write what we want to come to pass and throw it into the fire. And we chant and we talk, because we need a little bit more than prayer. We need a little bit more than meditation, but we do the meditation. We need crystals, we need incense, we need sage, we need, all of it. So that's what's been helpful for me in terms of self-care. But the spas are now open, so I'll implore you to go to the spa. I'll implore you to get massages, walks in the park, listen to music, read your favorite book, or listen to your favorite audio book, eat your favorite meal, ice cream, drink your favorite drink, whatever that is, even if that's just for a moment. So I would say just take small moments and just be in a moment as much as you can, decompartmentalize and balance that for yourself.
Monifa, and then yours.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that, in this moment, everybody is looking to the Black women leaders for everything, right? And so I used to be like, the elders in my family, sometimes you come to them with an emergency and sometimes they just tell you, look, you need to figure it out. I'll be like, how could she say that? But I think we have to incorporate that. And I saw this young champion tennis player yesterday, Naomi Osaka, model that, right? The person was asking this question, what do you hope people can pick up from you wearing these masks every day? And she basically was like, figure it out. She's like, what do you think? Like, how did it speak to you? And then move on, because everyone wants us to educate them. Everyone wants us to hold them. Everyone wants us to save them. everyone wants, I mean, you know, the list just goes on and on and on, and we're gonna have to just say no sometimes. And I'm saying that, not practicing it, but just knowing that that's something that we need to incorporate in our, you know, our culture as Black women activists right now. We all have some grandmothers that sometimes you come to them, they be like, you can figure it out, baby. I'm doing this over here. And that's what I learned yesterday when I watched that young sister on the tennis court. And I'll pass it to Yoruba.
Yeah, that was so good when Naomi said that. So smart. Really great to bring that up. And I love how you connected it to, you know, sometimes you just have to say no. Figure it out. I'm not on the front lines. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm not on the front lines like these women who I have so much respect for. But sometimes when you're making these kinds of films and bearing witness to these stories, it can be very painful. And I'll have to say, you know, I cried during these interviews, which you're not really supposed to do as a filmmaker, a journalist, but I cried. And, you know, I let myself cry, and I let myself feel the pain, because you know, I wasn't, we have this, there's this whole thing, you know, in our field about objectivity, right? Which is a whole nother conversation. But there's, I knew I was going down to make this film to find out as much as we can, the truth, and to humanize this woman. And part of that was, again, feeling that trauma and letting the feelings, and, you know, let that fuel me in terms of making the film. And I guess that's what I want to say, which is not exactly your question, but sometimes that, for me, that my righteous anger and my search for, you know, my search for justice in exposing the wrongdoing can fuel me and can help me do the work that I do. I mean, I do all the stuff of, you know, reading a good book, taking a walk, listening to music, having your favorite food, favorite drinks, for sure. But that there is a burning in me to tell these stories of our community, and hopefully towards bringing justice and light.
Thank you all. I really enjoy doing this. It's a horrible subject, but it actually is so fantastic for my professional person and my person, just, you know, Karen Thompson in the world, to be in a circle with you for an hour and a half and to hear your voices, to hear your work, and to hear your healing, because it is very healing. And so I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for being here tonight. Thanks again to NCAP for hosting this. Maybe we'll have a part 3. May all of you have your work continue to blossom, and may you find all of the sustenance that you need to continue with the fight. And thanks all for watching tonight. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for having us.